Okay, here we are going to be talking on page 51 about the special senses, in particular the eye and the ear. I am on page 282 of your book, and you can see here what we're looking at is the eye, and the first thing we have to identify are called the extrinsic eye muscles. And you can see that the eye has a variety of muscles that are attached to it and that are all around it, which help the eye move. These are just simply called your extrinsic eye muscles. You can see them situated right here. You do not need to know the individual names of those muscles, but if we were to point to them, you would need to know that they would be your extrinsic eye muscles. The next word or term on your sheet is called palpebrae. The palpebrae is a fancy term for eyelid. So the palpebrae is your eyelid. I just turned back one page to 281. And when we're looking at 281, we do see the lacrimal gland. So above each eye, underneath the skin, there is a gland called the lacrimal gland. And the purpose of the lacrimal gland is to secrete tears that wet and moisten your eye. Now, as those tears, you can see that with the photo, as those tears are moving across the eye, they do work their way into a little canal and then into this one area here called the lacrimal sac. From the lacrimal sac, the tears will then drain down through the nasal lacrimal duct into your nasal cavity. This would be the reason why you get the sniffles when you cry, because the excessive tears go down through this nasal lacrimal duct into your nasal cavity. Also, it explains the reason why our eyes are watery when we are allergic to something during the allergy season or we have a very severe cold, because the cells that make up this nasal lacrimal duct will constrict and cause the tears to back up out of our eyes, which therefore causes us to have watery eyes. Now, over the whites of the eye, and you don't really see that here in this picture, but over the whites of the eye and underneath the eyelid, there's a very thin membrane called the conjunctiva. And you do see it up on the picture just above the one that we're at. They do point it out here, the conjunctiva. Again, it would be around the whites of your eye and underneath your eyelid. Now, this is a very thin membrane, which just adds a little protection to the eye. But sometimes this conjunctiva can become inflamed, which we know as conjunctivitis or pink eye. And when that happens, it waters excessively, can become very goopy and uncomfortable. Almost feels like you have to itch your eye constantly with this. But it's highly contagious and very treatable. Okay, so here's our model of our eye that we have, and I know that you do have a picture in your book, or excuse me, your lab packet on page 52. You can fill those terms in using the same picture that you find on page 283 of your workbook, or excuse me, your book. I'm more concerned about showing you the models here because I know you guys can fill this in on your own elsewhere. So I'm going to take you through the eye and the different layers that we find. So first of all, one of the things you notice is the extrinsic eye muscles on the outside of this model. And we do have the whites of the eye right here. Now, over the whites of the eye would be that conjunctiva that we just talked about. But this first layer, the whites of the eye right here that you can see go towards the back of the eye, is referred to as the sclera. So this is your first layer of your eye. It's a very tough, durable layer. And notice how the extrinsic eye muscles attach to it. Now the sclera then forms this very clear structure in the very front here, which is called your cornea. Do not get the cornea confused with the lens. It is not the same thing, although both of them are very clear. The cornea is an extension of the sclera, essentially, right here. Now if I take away the sclera, we have our next layer underneath, which is called the choroid layer. And you see the choroid layer here, and a couple things to note. It is very vascularized, as you can see, lots of blood vessels, and it is very pigmented. It is a very dark color to it. Now, there are two layers, or two structures that the choroid layer creates. And I'm going to skip around just a little bit here. The outside, or the colorful part of our eye, is called the iris. The iris is an extension of the choroid layer. And yes, it is a pigmented layer, but the iris is actually a muscle that relaxes and constricts or contracts throughout the day. Because in the center of the iris is a space called the pupil. And the pupil is not a physical structure. There's nothing physically there. It's just simply a spot, a space in the middle of your iris. So when our pupils contract or relax, actually it's the iris that is making that become larger or smaller. Now if I take away and open this up a little bit, there is another extension of the choroid layer right here. This is half of it, the other half would be right there. And this is called the ciliary body. The ciliary body is right here. It is another extension of this layer here called the choroid layer. And what's important about the ciliary body is the lens here fits in and is attached, I guess if you will, to the ciliary body. So the lens, if we talk about the lens for just a minute, this is a very clear structure as well, and it helps us bend light and see objects close up and far away. Now, how does it allow us to see objects close up and far away? It has a lot to do with this ciliary body. The purpose of the ciliary body is to allow the lens to flatten out and get bigger, or shorten up and get smaller. So the lens is dictated by this ciliary body. Now the ciliary body is a muscle just like the iris is as well. And again, its role is to adjust the lens so we can see things far away or close up. The next layer is the retina. And this would be this very thin layer on the inside here. And this is your most delicate layer, the retina. And this is where you find all your rods and your cones, which help you see light and color, and how clear things will be as well. I'm going to get one other model here to show you some parts to the retina. And I will be just back in just 1 second. Okay, here's another model that I prefer over the one that we were just on. So you can see the retina here. It's a very fragile layer, allows us to see light and color, and there are a couple parts to it. Now, the fovea centralis and macula lutea, which is on your sheet there, I want you to bracket those two together. When on the exam, you guys can use either one of those interchangeably. Although they are different, it's really hard to differentiate between the two on here. If you look inside the retina here, you're going to find two spots. We have one spot here and another whiter spot over to the right. This spot over here, which looks like it has another little circle in the center, this is going to be referred to as the fovea centralis and or the macula lutea. Again, it would be the one over here on the left. And what's the purpose of that? The purpose of these two structures is to help us see vision clearly and color as well to our vision. That's our main area where we are going to see clarity to our vision and color to our vision. It's a little spot on the retina. Now, you can see on the back here, this is the optic nerve coming into the eye, and right where the optic nerve comes into the eye, there are blood vessels that come in here as well. This area where that optic nerve and blood vessels come into the eye is called the optic disc, and this is one area of the eye that we will not be able to see anything in. It's considered sometimes to be the blind spot of the eye. So you do want to make sure that you understand these two areas of the eye are different, and that you can use fovea centralis and or macula lutea interchangeably if it happens to be presented to you on the exam. Okay, let's look at the anterior segment of the eye compared to the posterior segment of the eye. I'm going to go to your book, and in your book on page 283 you see a picture of the eye. There is two compartments to the eye. In the front of the lens here, between the cornea and the lens, is called the anterior segment. And you notice in your book, underneath the anterior segment, it says aqueous humor. And this is, aqueous humor is the type of fluid that we find in this chamber, which is a very watery fluid. It's hence the name aqueous, like water. In the back of the lens is a larger chamber here called the posterior chamber, which holds a different type of fluid called the vitreous humor, which is very jelly-like fluid. And the purpose of the vitreous humor, though, is to make sure that the retina is held in place. If for some reason you may have a detached retina, that could be a reason. One of the reasons could be that this vitreous humor pulled away and the retina was detached from the wall. So it has a really important role in making sure that the retina stays against the wall of the eye, if you will, in order to not detach it.